So on surface level, I've seen like Reddit posts saying like Frenzied Skitterer needs to get nerfed, and I think that's like, I'm not saying it shouldn't get nerfed per se, but I do think that's also the wrong way to look at it. Like Frenzied Skitterer right now, I mean, in the past this hasn't been the case, but right now it's contributing to probably a more diverse meta, all things considered. I mean, it could get some minor nerf. I wouldn't mind that at all, but I don't think it's like the biggest thing to nerf, right? Like, it's not that I disagree that it should get nerfed, but the popularity of the opinion that Frenzied Skitterer should get nerfed, and how many people agree with that and don't really talk about a lot of other cards that are more unhealthy, means they're thinking about it wrong, right? That's the thing. Like, Frenzied Skitterer creates a lot of interesting game states and play patterns where you have the ability to, you know, pause and think and, you know, react to what your opponent's doing. That's fine. It enables several archetypes. It's kind of like quote-unquote overpowered, but it allows like spiders to feel like they have a place in the meta where, to be honest, I mean, this card doesn't feel really great without them. Shadow Isles definitely has in the past needed to get nerfed. For sure, 100%. I don't think that's true in the present. Like, that's right. Like, Shadow Isles has gotten absolutely shit on in kind of both of the last two patches. And I think it did deserve, like, kind of a double dumping like that, right? And that's fine. I think at this point in time, like, nerfing Shadow Isles more is probably overkill, somewhat, right? It's like Skitterer is definitely maintaining Shadow Isles' position in the meta. I think, like, a lot of people will look at game design on a card-by-card basis. They'll say, basically, you know, oh, look at this card. It's a 3/3/3 with Fearsome that does all this. Therefore, it should be nerfed. And that kind of assumes that every card should... There should just be, like, a general power level that cards should exist at, which I don't think makes sense as an assumption. Or people will look at it by saying the idea of an auto-include card is fundamentally unhealthy. And that's... There is kind of some truth to that, because like I said, the objective is creating diversity, and balance, by the way, is a means to that end, and sometimes balance doesn't spearhead diversity, so sometimes balance is useless, but balance is often a means to an end in diversity. And the thing is that, yes, by having some, let's say, quote-unquote auto-include cards, you are clamping the maximum diversity you can have, I guess? Auto-include is like a weird argument for diversity, because it depends on the card being auto-included, right? Like, certain auto-include cards can actually increase diversity. Like, let's take Frenzied Skitterer and Glimpse. Both of these are, let's call auto-include, although I might be able to find some examples where, you know, you don't run them. Like, for example, Spooky Karma is often not running Glimpse, but let's just say auto-include, because they're close enough, whatever. I'm not going to contest that, right? So it's like Skitterer and Glimpse are kind of auto-include, and they both create interesting play patterns, and they both help contribute to a meta state where Shadow Isles has a leg in the meta. And yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people that are kind of like traumatized by Shadow Isles. Like, they've been frustrating for, you know, at least the first month of play, and for a lot of people, the second month after that too. But I mean, do we need to kick them while they're down? I think that's a little much. It would make some people happy for sure. And I know there's some of you guys that would like to see Shadow Isles just like literally not see play. I think that would be a little bit much at this time, right? So that's it. I mean, that's all you really have to ask yourself. You have to ask yourself, like, is this gonna be a better change for the meta overall? And I mean, I don't think that nerfing those two cards is going to be like the best way for this meta to move forward, right? And don't get me wrong, again, I'm not saying that Frenzied Skitterer shouldn't be nerfed. I've never once said that, although I assume that's probably what it sounds like I'm saying. I very specifically said they could make it not, you know, they could tweak one thing about it and keep it a good card, and that's fine. I wouldn't mind that. But the point is everyone is looking at design feedback with like the idea of just comparing card by card, and I think it's a lot better to think about what the meta state will be like given the implications of the nerf. And this brings me back to what started this conversation, which is Will of Ionia. Somebody asked me why I think Will of Ionia should get nerfed. I think it lowers diversity by existing at 4 mana. I think it's a powerful card, but right now I think Ionia is one of the stronger regions in the game, so it's representing a lot of value there. I think it will still be very played at 5 mana, just because, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's kind of like the only, like, coming from other card games, all forms of removal feel overcosted. Will of Ionia is kind of like the one form of removal that doesn't feel hyper overcosted compared to other card games. So it feels very good to play, like coming from MTG and stuff, and a lot of people like it for that reason. But I think it limits the ability for a lot of strategies to see play, just kind of like by existing. 2 good examples of that are going to be Braum and a more build-around version of Fiora.
We could use a bite.
And I guess you can just block this. Vengeance should cost 6. Possibly. I can't agree with that. I'm not disagreeing with that either, but it would be a complicated thing to imagine a meta state where Vengeance costed 6.
So young.
That's hard. Could be. But yeah, I think that Will at 4 mana is going to produce a meta with less diversity than Will at 5 mana. That's it. And that's the only thing that needs to happen. Well, okay, there's a bit of an asterisk there. There's a bit of an asterisk there.
You won't suffer long. It will all be over soon.
Yeah, that's not too surprising. Why am I playing this deck? I kind of need to play something else. The asterisk, the one asterisk to that statement is, again, it's not just a diverse experience, it's a fun and diverse experience, right? And for that reason, I will say, there's a couple examples there. A, I like the fact that Elnux got nerfed, even though Freljord is struggling as a region right now. And that's because Elnux are not really fun. Overall. That's not my stance, and there are some people that find Elnux fun. And the kind of people that find Elnux fun are usually going to be the kind of people that don't mind playing negative EV cards, which makes the nerf to them, you know, still totally fair. Right? So that's fine. And also, what this means is certain strategies shouldn't be super competitive. Like, for example, let's say they buffed Yasuo. Well, maybe if Yasuo was in tier 2, like high tier 2, let's say Yasuo was high tier 2 as a concept, that would add to diversity because it would create a new archetype, but it might be really unfun to play against. So maybe it's better that Yasuo, I'm not saying is necessarily definitively an example of this, but there are certain archetypes that are designed to be tier 3 or lower because they're not super fun to play against at a high level. And you could definitely argue that Yasuo is one of those. That's the asterisk. It doesn't just have to be a diverse experience, it also has to be fun. But, I mean, fun is usually a given. There's only a few scenarios where it's like, you know, too much of a certain thing is going to be a bad thing. Because it doesn't feel like there's a crazy new amount you can do after this patch, right? I think that people will be messing around with, you know, a lot of, here, let me pull it up. What are people messing around with here? Ephemeral combo is actually still just good, right? People are going to mess around with, like, the Mage Seekers, Callista, Pack Mentality. I think people are probably close to being done messing around with Iceborne Legacy. Although that's true for Callista as well. So it's like Pack Mentality and Mage Seekers. People are going to try to find replacements to Rekindler in Bannerman. And, you know, BBG's playing, like, Ionia with, I don't know what, I still don't know exactly what the splash is. I haven't seen that exact net deck, but apparently it's just running Deny. And then the fourth thing is the new version of, like, Kinko Wayfinders, probably. Oh, I want to add a finishing point to what I was saying earlier about game design. That's why the word oppressive and the word overpowered are two completely different words. I don't think Will of Ionia is overpowered. I think it's oppressive. And I think that if you confuse those words, it's going to be really, really hard to have meaningful discussions about game design. It's the same exact stance I had with Deny at 3 mana. I was basically a proponent of Deny being nerfed from a very early point, and a lot of people were like, Deny's fine, it's just play around it, it's not overpowered. And my argument never was that it was overpowered. It has nothing to do with power level. I think that's the most unhealthy mentality when we're trying to talk about game design. Everyone, like, just erase the concept of nerf and buff from your vocabulary. Those literally shouldn't even be words in the conversation about game design. Like, it's not about power level. It just has, it's just about creating a good environment. And, like, certain cards are going to do that at a really high power level, and certain cards are going to do that at a really low power level. Right. You don't want rock, paper, scissors situations where one deck always beats other decks regardless of skill and trials and texts, like how Will of Ionia draw destroys Braum decks. Yes, that's generally speaking true. And yes, that's part of the argument as well. That's a good point. So basically, right now, in terms of solving this new meta, there's 5 new strategies you can adopt since the patch. 3 of them are based on buffs and 3 of them are based on nerfs and 2 of them are based on buffs. Strategy number 1. Decide the best way to run Bannerman now that Rekindler's nerfed. Strategy number 2. Decide the best way to run Kinko Wayfinder now that Conspirator's nerfed. Spoiler alert, it's probably the same exact deck with no cards changed. Strategy number 3. Decide the best way to play aggro now that Brood Awakening is buffed. This is either Spider's Nox, discard Swarm, standard discard, or They Who Endure Brood Awakening kind of style of deck. Or maybe something weird like Magro's like aggro control Karma Spiders thing. Those are the 3 strategies to try to find basically replacements for the tier 1 decks post nerf. Because none of those nerfs really like hurt those decks so much that they're not going to be great anymore. But they all do potentially make you question how they're built. Okay, so those are going to be 3 good decks for the future. Strategy number 4. These are based on the idea of buffs as opposed to nerfs. Figure out a way to run Mage Seekers in a good capacity. That's going to be, you know, some kind of Lux deck, presumably. I actually liked the idea of the Remembrance Reckoner deck. Maybe I'll try that again. Maybe I will try that again. And then strategy number 5. Pack Mentality is kind of the same thing as figure out the best way to make aggro work. But Pack Mentality is also not really an aggro card. Yeah, 5 is Pack Mentality. That's the other, like, potential card that people are messing around with. I would say, like, people have already largely dismissed the potential of Callista and Iceborne Legacy. So those ones kind of aren't cards. Those are going to be kind of the 5, like, quote-unquote new decks that are cropping up. All 5 of them are kind of versions of decks that have already existed, but those are going to be the 5, like, kind of shifts to high-level decks, basically. Whereas, like, there's a lot of decks like Spooky Karma that will effectively stay good and I think largely be unchanged. What can exist now that couldn't before because of Hecarim and Nux? Basically nothing, which is why I don't really like the patch notes. I don't think the new patch notes herald a major increase in diversity. I think they might actually lower it. Long term, of course. I mean, you might say, but Swim on ladder right now, it's much more diverse than it was 2 days ago. Yeah, a patch just hit. People are messing around with a lot of things.